Prohibition is just one of the many challenges that the Ontario wine industry has faced, absolutely. Prohibition and the effects of Prohibition were very devastating. In fact, the industry put us back several decades. In fact, there was experimentation with vinifera and some French hybrids here as early as the 1920s. However, because of Prohibition, many of those vines had to be pulled out. We didn't see a replanting of a lot of those vinifera or French hybrids until the 80s, early 70s for some pioneers.
But we've been growing grapes here for 200 years almost, right? And we've had lots of different grape varieties, lots of wine styles since then. We've had some really big challenges like Prohibition. But our newest sort of wine industry that really is notably different only happened in the last 20, 30 years. So we have a couple pioneer wineries that really push the envelope. We've had a lot of new winemakers and wineries jumping on board since about maybe 1990s and 2000, and it's really expanded tremendously in the last 10 years even.
We do have challenges that helps us and guides us that at the end of the day does create great wine. One of our biggest and will always be our weather. We have very unpredictable weather. Our winters can get cold, but as each year progresses, we are learning to adapt and we're learning to take what the weather gives us and make incredible wines out of it.
The fact that we're basically restricted to a very small growing area. So even though Ontario is an enormous province and Canada is a huge country, the wine growing area here is actually very, very limited. Right? So that is something where we have our challenges. We just can never reach the scale of other countries really, like France or Spain in sheer volume. Right?
One of the things that we love about Ontario is that it's a great place to live. It is a great place to live because we have standard of living. So those costs are related to minimum wage that are paid to workers so that they're paid a fair wage. Many countries don't have that. So if you look at labor costs in some places like South America, South Africa, other places around the world, you don't see that minimum wage or that standard of living that is adhered to across the province. So we have that here. So cost of labor is definitely a factor. Has benefits and of course challenges, any large organization. So when we're working with the LCBO as wineries, one of the things, an advantage of being in the LCBO is that it's a lot of exposure. So if your wines are in the LCBO, they are available to consumers that necessarily don't have to visit your winery to make those purchases.
The LCBO truly only works if you want to play a volume game.
Well, the LCBO is an enormous company, right? I mean, it represents 10 million people, right, that it buys for as the sole provider. So just to do business with basically an entity that big is very challenging for a small producer.
The LCBO doesn't control the prices, but if a winery sets a price of the wine and the LCBO is selling it for that price as well, the winery is unable to discount that price at their winery. They've already agreed on a price within Ontario for that wine. So that's where that pricing control comes in with the LCBO.
I don't believe wine can be rated because what tastes good to one person might not taste good to another person. It does help having somebody kind of describe the wines a little bit in a professional manner so you can kind of see what flavors are in the wine. But in the end, price and points or percentages matter relatively little. That's, for me, it's always the same, that a person that likes sweet wine will not like a dry wine. So even if I give them a $100 bottle of dry wine, they're not going to like it. They would much rather drink the $10 bottle of sweet wine.
Anyone can start a blog, anyone can start rating wine. So I think what's very important, if you are someone who is making decisions based on ratings, awards, etc., as many consumers do. As I mentioned, there's 14 million wines available. We do need some guidance as consumers. So what's really important is to find a critic or a wine reviewer whose palate seems to be aligned with yours. So whoever that may be, try some wines that are reviewed well by various wine writers. See if your palate is the same. If you're looking at some of the same styles of wine, then that might be a good score or a good review or award for you to follow.
It's the same with price in the wine, right? A $60 bottle or $100 bottle or $200 bottle versus a maybe $15 bottle. If you look at ratings for wines, in the end, the determining factor is whether the wine's sold. That's going to be the ultimate thing in the end. If the wine's sold successfully, then everything was right about it. But we do need something like Wine Spectators or some of the other wine critics, for example, that we have in Ontario, that basically review our wines to give us some reach, because a lot of people might not have known about it. It gives us a chance to tell our story.
It usually doesn't affect small wineries because we don't have a brand that's big enough to actually force somebody to counterfeit the brand. But I know and I have heard of larger wineries having that issue in other countries where the label was faked. The wine was pretty much just mixed together, sold in supermarkets in those countries, and VQA does check up on this. Obviously, it cannot check every single supermarket in every single country.
Imitation is the best form of flattery, right? So the fact that our wines are being already counterfeit, I think we can take that as a form of flattery. We're doing something well that the rest of the world wants to imitate. They're not able to imitate ice wine. The conditions are very, very particular for ice wine. We need that -8 degrees or colder for a minimum of 3 days. We need that natural freeze on the vine of the grapes. We need that Brix levels. It's the freeze thaw that's very important. It can't be replicated by other countries that are mixing syrup and color or juice or putting their grapes in artificial refrigeration. So ice wine as our national product is very highly regulated. As such, it is expensive, it's time consuming, it takes a lot of grapes to make a bottle of ice wine. So as it's being counterfeit produced, one of the things that we're looking at within Ontario and Canada as an industry is how can we prevent that? Because all it takes is one bottle of fake and substandard counterfeit wine to go out there and somebody to taste it and say, I had Canadian ice wine, I had Ontario ice wine, it was terrible, it's not worth the money. So that word of mouth is very damaging to us, so we're taking counterfeit wine very seriously. We're looking at some QC codes that are quite important. So if those QC codes are on a bottle of ice wine, for example, that bottle can only be scanned once. It links to the winery website, it gives you all of the information on when those grapes were harvested, the particulars in behind the winemaking of that individual wine, etc., and it can only be scanned once. So if someone is trying to replicate or counterfeit a bottle of ice wine, it makes it more difficult. We have the Vintners Quality Alliance, and that basically regulates the origin of the wines as well as the quality of the wines, standards of the wines.
For VQA itself as a standard is a relatively good base. You can still go higher, and over the last 10 years it's kind of shown that since VQA has become more and more part of wineries and more of this part of the sales, that the wine quality of Canadian wine has increased.
If you pick up a VQA product, you're going to get a VQA product. You're going to get something that's grown in Niagara, and you're going to know what you get. And because of all the testing that's going on behind the scenes, you know that you're drinking a safe product.
Absolutely. So at various stages, the juice and the must before fermentation gets sent in. So samples are taken of that so that the Brix level, so the ripeness of the grapes at harvest, both sugar, phenolics, etc., gets sent to the VQA. Each grape variety each year has a minimum Brix level, so minimum ripeness level. So that is regulated throughout the winemaking process. Samples are collected and sent to the VQA as well, along with the finished wine. So each finished wine, while a winery can produce VQA wines, exclusively, each individual wine has to go through these stages of approval. So when the wine is finished, it goes to the VQA panel for laboratory testing to make sure that it's not faulted and that it is safe, as well as a sensory panel that determines whether this is a strong and typical representative of that particular grape variety, the region, and that vintage. What each person is looking for clearly is something different. So whether they're looking for a large winery experience, whether they're looking for a small winery experience, whether they're looking to find some wine that was only produced, one barrel was made and they want an exclusive tasting with the winemaker, or maybe they want a very large experience, we have all of that to offer here in Ontario. And I think that's one of the things that makes us quite unique.
So the winemaker in me says the wine should come first. The businessman in me says the customer service comes first. And that's because we can have very great wines, but if you don't make a person feel welcome when they walk into your door, no matter what, they're not going to like the wines. So the first thing is always customer service, welcome people in, make sure that you can guide them through a tasting without telling them what they should be buying or should be drinking, and then making sure that the wines themselves are up to standard and up to a quality level that you can confidently represent.
So you could go by history or the size of the winery, but it might not agree with everyone. Someone might think that the smaller wineries offer them a benefit that they can't get at one of the big ones because it's maybe not as intimate or not as personal.
I am a fan of Pinot Noir as a wine, not necessarily as a grape to grow or as a wine to make, just because it's one of the toughest to actually ripen, and it's one of the wines that will show a wine fault or something that's wrong with it the earliest. Every other variety will kind of hide it a little bit.
I really like Pinot Noir. I like the finesse. I like the elegance that you can get in a red wine. It falls a little bit outside of the typical red wines that all tend to have a very similar alcohol content, similar sort of barrel aging, tannin structure, the vanilla, the smokiness. And Pinot just has a little bit more excitement there. There's nicer acidity, for example, a very, very nice fruit. I'm a big fan of cherries. So.
Really depends on my mood. It might be a boiling hot day out and I want that nice, beautiful, refreshing aromatic white. You know, I want that Gewürztraminer, that Riesling, a fresh, spritzy rosé. I might want a big, bold red because that's just how I'm feeling today. I might want one of this region's beautiful sparklings that we make, or, you know, anything from A to B, and there is endless amount of options. Picking a favorite is never going to be something that's possible for me. I'll always want to be trying something new, or you know, and there's just so many things, and there's so many options. Why would you want to drink just your one favorite when you have so many things out there?
I think that really is context dependent and mood dependent. So there's some days where you feel like a sparkling wine, and some days that you feel like you might want to have a red or a white. Some days you'd like something sweet, and I think it's really dependent on that context. And luckily, we're able to make wines in so many different styles that no matter your mood, no matter the meal that you're serving, you can always find a fantastic Ontario wine to go with that.
Be prepared is a big thing. I was in university before I came here, and the workload is much more intense here. You're in 7 classes, and you're doing projects in all your classes, and you're making wine, so it's just, you know, be prepared, be mentally prepared, be physically prepared, and you'll do fine, you know.
If someone's coming here to Niagara and they're planning on opening a winery here, there are lots of factors, obviously, that they need to consider. First off, they do want to spend a lot of time here and speak to many winery owners. So that's the number one thing. Speak to winery owners, talk to them about best practices, what their challenges were, advice that they have. One of the things that make Ontario a very strong industry is that we all work together to raise our standards and support each other. So
when me and my brother started, we spent a lot of hours in here. I was actually teaching at Niagara College at that point still, so I remember basically being in the store here, getting dressed, running over to the college, teaching 2 or 3 hours, and running back here, getting dressed for the store again. And then once the store closed, I started driving tractor at night because I didn't have time to enjoy it during the day. So I might put on 10 hours in the store, 3 hours at school, and another 4 or 5 hours driving at night. Woke up the next day again.
Pretty much that we do everything on our own, and we really want you to come in and taste the wine. Because we do have some of the most unique wines in Ontario, especially some of our varietals and some of the styles that we make.
My saddest experience in the wine industry is that very few people trust their own tastes. Right? They don't feel strong enough, like they don't know enough for something to say, you know what, I like this wine and I'm proud of it. So they'd rather drink something that they might not enjoy as much because of maybe the wine's a certain price point or things like this. We do focus groups, right? So we'd actually do tastings with strangers, and all of a sudden they have no reference point.
If you look at our wines in competitions around the world, Canadian wines are consistently winning in categories of sparkling wine, Riesling, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Cabernet Franc. We're doing very well here. We're focusing on a select few varieties. We're doing them well. So we already are competing well on the world stage, and I think that if you follow what a lot of wine writers are saying these days, they are saying that Canada, Ontario, Niagara specifically, is the least discovered and one of the most talented and beautiful wine regions to visit.